Liza Lawrence here with episode 7, Baby Miracles. Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm your host, Liza Lawrence, a wife, mother, teacher, and miracle lover. If you're new to this podcast, here's what we do here. Each week on Miracle Monday, we celebrate awe-inspiring true stories from regular people like you and me. People who have experienced something surprising and wonderful that could be considered the work of a divine source. My desire is to help us recognize God's hand and His love in our lives, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen. Thanks for listening to the show. Now let's celebrate wonders and miracles together. We remember the babies born sleeping, those we carried but never held, those we held but could not take home, those who came home but could not stay. So October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, or Miscarriage Awareness Month. So to all those mothers who have experienced a miscarriage or a stillborn or the loss of an infant, our prayers and our heart goes out to you this month in remembrance of those babies lost. I myself have had a couple miscarriages and understand the pain of that, and we'll be discussing that a little bit today in the podcast. So today's episode features a mother who will have a conversation about the process of miscarriage and getting her third baby here and the miracles that took place with that. And then another mother who also had experiences with difficulty getting children here and decided to go the adoption route and the process with that. Our last story is of a woman who was shot when she was 11 years old while babysitting. All really beautiful stories, but first we're going to hear from our sponsor, Meditations on the Mount. Meditations on the Mount are Bible-based meditations. If you've ever longed for ways to feel God's love, His peace, and stillness in your life, then Meditations on the Mount can help. My husband and I created these, and because our response for our first album was so great, we just created Meditations on the Mount for children. And I got some awesome feedback this week from a gal who said her son, he's 7 years old. They were getting ready for church on Sunday. He was feeling all crazy and hyper, and she sat him down while they were getting ready and said, I just want you to sit here and listen to these meditations. And she turned on the Meditations on the Mount for children. And she told me personally, she said, I couldn't believe that he just calmed right down and was calm the rest of the day, and we were able to get ready without a big hassle. So she just loved them and was saying thank you to me for creating this meditation CD. And I really appreciated hearing her feedback and how it had helped her son. So if you're interested in those meditation albums, you can find them on Amazon, on iTunes, or at meditationsonthemount.com. You can also find them on my website under the sponsors page at wondersandmiracles.com. So check that out. Okay, so I'm here with Emily from Utah, and she's going to share a miracle story that happened about 8 years ago. So Emily, thanks for being on the show, and let's hear your story.
Thanks, Liza. So this happened, I had 2 young children at home, and I had been trying for a while to get pregnant with a third baby. We had had some fertility issues and had a couple of miscarriages. So I had had 2 miscarriages while we were trying for this baby. So we were really, really excited for this little one to come. I went to the doctor, and since I had 3 miscarriages in total, so because I've been through that, I would insist on early ultrasounds and getting the blood work. And how the blood work works is they would take your blood and check for your HCG level, which is the pregnancy hormone. And then 2 days later, they check it again. And if it doubles or more, you're usually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So on a Friday, I got the call with my second numbers, and they had not doubled. And the nurse tried to be kind and say, it's probably not looking good. It's probably not going to work. We'll have you come in and meet with the doctor. So I had all weekend, of course, because
Right. That was Friday.
that was Friday. And so having been through this, my heart was just broken.
Mhm.
Getting pregnant has always been a roller coaster for me. So I went to church and I was playing the piano in our children's group at church. And they had a special guest that day. And he talked about how our Heavenly Father will listen to our prayers and will answer even the simplest of prayers. And at that moment, I was not feeling that.
Were you angry?
Yeah, I was sad and thinking, oh, sure, he'll answer this prayer, but he won't answer mine.
Mhm.
So he's talking about how he lost a toy and how he was led to find it and how it had strengthened his beliefs in God and how all that had shaped him. And I'm back at the piano just sobbing a little bit
Mhm.
to keep it together so that I can play when it's my turn. And so I get home and I kind of get this resolve. I felt like I wanted to will things okay. And that's when I began praying because I believed that things could be okay. And so I was praying a lot before my appointment on Monday. And we went in and the doctor couldn't find the baby on the ultrasound. So he sent me to the hospital for just in case, right? So we're still praying and we go to the hospital. And generally, that early in pregnancy, they can't get the ultrasound picture from the belly.
And how far along were you in this process?
Oh, maybe 7 weeks, 7 or 8 weeks.
So you were pretty early. Mhm.
Yeah. And they can't usually see the baby through the belly. So they hadn't gone that way in the doctor's. But at the hospital, the technician just had this thought, let's just try it first. And so she put the thing on my belly, and as soon as she put the ultrasound on, there was the baby and the heartbeat.
Wow.
And it was just phenomenal. It was. So her middle name is Joyce, and I like to think of it as Rejoice because that's where our sweet little one came, and how we knew that she was going to be okay and was going to be able to join our family. So
that's awesome. I've had a couple miscarriages as well, and I know the emotional time it is. It's you're up and down. How did it feel to see that baby on the monitor?
Yeah, it was indescribable. It was so much relief and excitement and a lot of tears shed, knowing that God knew what I had gone through and that he was willing to, well, maybe not willing, but that it was okay for me to keep that baby in his plan, and that I wouldn't have to go through the emotional trauma of losing another baby.
And did you gain a stronger belief of prayer after that?
I did. So I had struggled with prayer probably since the first miscarriage. I had actually stopped praying after that for a while because it was so hard.
Yeah.
And I had felt maybe betrayed. And so I struggled with prayer, like real prayer, like I would say prayers or whatever. But with that first miscarriage, I had thought that maybe God didn't listen to my prayers, or that he listened, but he wouldn't answer them. I would just have to experience whatever, and then that would be my answer. And so I kind of felt like maybe a little bit envious of how other people could receive direct answers to their prayers.
And like for some reason you didn't, but they could.
Right.
Yeah.
If that meant that it was because I didn't deserve it, or worthiness issue, or if it was just that wasn't the way that he would communicate with me. So I had to come to terms with that and to put my trust in him again, that he would answer me and that things could be okay again.
So it sounds like it really did take quite a bit of faith to say, okay, I'll give prayer another try. I think a lot of people have experienced the exact same thing you have, that process of being confused and a little bit feeling betrayed by God. Like, wait, we have these promises that you say you'll answer, ask and you shall receive, but why didn't I? So I think your story illustrates that process of trying to understand how God works and how we work with him and how prayers are heard and answered, all those questions.
Yeah.
And it is such a journey to make peace with that whole process. That was 8 years ago. Have you had more positive experiences with prayer since then?
Yeah. So after that third pregnancy, it was just a little bit rough. She came early, so she had to spend some time in the hospital, and I was feeling anxious and, had some postpartum depression and stuff. And I remembered all of that when she was 2 or 3, and I was pretty sure that I didn't want to have any more babies. I wanted off the roller coaster.
Uh-huh.
So it came time in my mind, I needed to know if we were done. So I went somewhere that is a holy place for me. And I prayed. I prayed with all my heart. And I said, I think I'm just going to stay here till you answer me.
I love it.
Because it's so important, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, if you're thinking of doing anything that could prevent more children coming to your family, you need to know that.
Right. Something permanent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, it probably took a 2 or 3 minutes. It was long enough that if I hadn't have made the resolve to stay there, I could have just blown it off and left and thought maybe something would occur to me,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I waited, and I had this really incredible feeling, and it started from the tip of my head and ran all the way down my body to my toes, like a waterfall of peace, and that there was another baby for us. And so I kind of, made a deal. Okay, I'll do it one more time. And I was really hesitant because between my first 2 children, there was 1 miscarriage, and between my second and third, there were 2 miscarriages. And so I was really apprehensive.
Mm-hmm.
But turned out that we were able to get pregnant easily, which was a first, and everything went really well in her pregnancy. In fact, I made it clear to 38 weeks, which is considered full term, for the first time, and had no health problems with her at all. So I kind of felt like Heavenly Father took that into consideration, that, okay, she said it's her last one.
Right. Make it a good one.
That's right. That's right. So now I've got my sweet little 2-year-old that we are so happy she's in our family. And I know without a doubt that she was ready and waiting to come. So
that's cool. That's a neat story. I kind of had a similar experience with my 4th baby. My pregnancies were really rocky and hard, and I felt that stirrings of time to get the next one here. And I thought, I can't do it. I can't do it. I was on bed rest with all mine. And I thought, oh, and I had 3 little ones. And I felt the Spirit say to me, just get her here. I have other work for you to do. And it was interesting because my husband and I had both had dreams at separate times of a little girl. And so when we got the ultrasound with our 4th baby, we were both crossing our fingers. Please be the girl. Please be the girl. We don't want to do this again. And she was our little girl.
Yeah, being a woman can be really rough. Our poor husbands there were nights that I would just be crying in bed, and he, would just very tenderly ask, is this about the miscarriage, and and it was, I'm just crying again, because that's what I do these days, is just burst into tears, because it's rough. It's really hard to go through.
It is. And I think it's one of those topics, we don't talk about it enough to say this is really a death. It's a loss for that mom. And I think it's important to allow ourselves to go through that grieving process. Even if you have, some people think, well, what's the big deal if you already have other children? At least you've got those children. Mm-hmm. And it's not like that. It feels like you've just lost a baby, a child.
It doesn't matter how early the loss is either. As soon as you get that positive pregnancy test, that baby yours, you start dreaming, and so it is a death. But the interesting part with miscarriage is a lot of times only the mother feels that death so acute. Husbands are wonderful, and they will grieve too, but the baby's not real for them yet. They get excited, but then there's a loss and they say, oh, that's really sad. Let's try again, whereas moms we've not only have all those emotions and thoughts and dreams wrapped up in that, but then our bodies have to go through a healing process. So it's hard, and it's hard to talk about with others because either you don't know what to say to comfort them, or you don't know what they're going to say in hopes to comfort you. A communication could bring about the hope that we can use words that are comforting and to ease each other's burdens. So
Well, thank you, Emily, so much for sharing your story with us. And it was kind of serendipitous. It wasn't planned that we were going to talk about miscarriages, but it ended up that we did, and it was Miscarriage Awareness Month. So that was a neat part to that story. I love how God orchestrates things, and I'm always amazed. So thank you, Emily. So I'm here with Megan from North Carolina, and she's going to share a story with us about her adoption process. So Megan, thanks for being on the show, and let's hear your story.
Thank you, Liza. My journey, I guess to really get started, I would have to talk about my personal journey with adoption from a very young age. I knew as a child really that I would be a mom, but moreover, I really knew that I would adopt. I don't know why, I just always knew. And in my head, as I got older, the story evolved more and more, and really it took on its own life outside of me. I envisioned a girl. I would always have a girl, and it would just be me and her in my journey. There was never a husband or other children. It was just me and her, and her name was going to be Felicity Ann, because I'm Megan Ann. And I envisioned tea parties and traveling, and I envisioned wonderful experience with two best friends and mother and daughter. And that's my idea of what I had as motherhood. Well, about 2000 or so, I was at home one Friday night. I was living in Chicago at the time, and typically on Fridays, I was always out. Like my girlfriends and I would get together and we'd go have dinner, or we'd go see a movie. I mean, I was a very social creature, but for some reason I found myself home on this Friday night, and that's often how miracles start. Is things aren't part of the norm. And I was sitting at home watching this documentary on PBS, and it was about adoption, specifically in the Midwest, with a strong focus on Chicago. Immediately I was drawn in because I knew this was something that I should probably hear, because there was a big piece of it about transracial adoption. And transracial is looking at usually parents who are white adopting children who are of another nationality or color or religion, however it might be. Again, this whole documentary that they did was based on people living in Chicago and the Midwest, and their history and their development and their rearing of children, and from the children's perspective and from the parents' perspective, and looking at how that shaped and molded them as people. And it was just very, very, very eye-opening and heartbreaking, but also hopeful, because I knew that there was a message that I was supposed to get from this. So towards the end, there was a piece about price. And that always comes up with adoption. They'll say, why is it so expensive? And I'm not really going to talk about that, but this particular piece was about how much it costs to adopt for a child that you specifically wanted. And now these prices are almost 20 years ago, but for a blonde-haired, blue-eyed male, it was roughly $70,000.
Wow.
I know. The female was a little bit less expensive, and then brunette children. And as a brunette, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, a blonde-haired child goes for more than me. Next came Asian children at around 40 to 50,000, and always the male more expensive than the female, always.
Wow.
Moving into Latino children, so like, children from Peru and Brazil and Ecuador, and also African children. So looking at adopting into Africa, those were kind of the third tier, and those were between 20 and 30,000. And at the very, sorry, I get really choked up about this piece, but at the very, very, very bottom were African American children, children that were born right here in this country. The female was more expensive than the male, which was different from all the other types of children. And for the low, low price of $8,000 to $15,000 at that time, you could adopt a Black male child. And I remember the documentary ended and I wept. I wept. I just could not stop crying because I thought, how can you put a price tag on a child, God's child? This was God's child. How could we as people say that a child was more valuable than another? And in that moment, God touched my heart and said, you're going to be the mother of African American boys. And I remember I almost laughed because I thought, that's not my vision. I'm going to be the mom of Felicity, and we're going to travel, and we're going to have tea parties, and I can't raise boys by myself. So fast forward just a little bit, and I was talking to my good friend, and I was telling her about this whole process and about all these things. And she happened to be Black. And I said, am I crazy? Is this crazy? And she said, no, it's not. It's beautiful. God is talking to you, and you don't not listen to God. And so I said, okay, well, if this is going to happen, then I need to be married. I need stability. Like, I need more than this kind of free-spirited life that I had seen with just me and my one daughter. So I put it on hold, and I just said, God, whenever the time is right, you'll tell me. So a few years later, my best friend and I, Michael, who's now my husband, we were dating, and we had gotten serious. We'd known each other for a while, and we got to a point where we realized that we were supposed to be together. And I told him, if you're truly saying that you want me to be with you and we're going to get married, you need to know that children are on the table. And I have really been called to adopt African American boys. And we had had this conversation before, and he knew, but now it was the big question. And before I said yes, I said, this is the contingency. So if, we're going to do this. And he said, absolutely. He said, I knew this going into it, and I want to be a dad, and the idea of boys is great.
Wow.
So that was 2000. Yeah, that was 2007. And then in 2008, we started going around to different adoption agencies. And I just remember this feeling of being overwhelmed constantly. I knew, there was a price tag associated with this, but it was this feeling of, where do we even begin? And so we just started going to every adoption agency, and I just felt really overwhelmed and lost. So again, part of the miracle, my husband was at work, and he was working in the financial industry at that point. He had been at his job for maybe just a few months. He was walking by one of the offices that was kind of down the hall from him, and was introducing himself to a man that worked there. And the man happened to be African American, and he was talking about how he had adopted a girl. And my husband said, oh, that's what we want to do. That's so cool. Where did you go? And he mentioned this little agency in Chicago that was run by these two women who were retired. It was not a big fancy outfit. And my husband said it was at that moment he knew, like, we have to go to this place. Like, this was calling him. And so he came home and told me, we're going to go to this agency. It's this small agency above a restaurant, in Chicago. And it's not anything fancy, but the guy that I work with said, we have to go here. And so we did. I walked in, and it was like the room was illuminated. Those times when that this is a God thing, like, the woman came out from the back. She had been in her office and came down the hall, and she gave us a big hug. And there were these pictures of all these families with all these children. And my heart just swelled. And I knew that this woman was going to be instrumental in the whole process for us. And she was. So we sat down and we talked, and it was just this beautiful experience. It was like old friends reunited. And she talked about how she had adopted 2 African American boys and the experience, and it just felt so right. And I remember her really looking at us and saying, okay, you have 2 years. From the time that you sit here with me tonight until the time you have a child, you roughly have 2 years. That's the average. Could be a little more, could be a little less. She said, but we like to prepare people because this is a huge life change. You don't have
the 9-month period
Mhm.
of preparing like most parents do, because it'll happen very quickly. So we like people to have plenty of time to start preparing and getting ready, because you could get a call and may literally have to come pick up a child in a matter of days or hours.
Hmm.
Okay, so we started getting our finances in order. We started preparing the room. We were thinking we have 2 years, so let's do some traveling. Let's do the things that we want to do before the baby comes. So almost 6 months to the day, we sat with her in that room. We got a phone call. We were actually at Lake Michigan. We had spent some time that weekend going camping and just antiquing and all those fun things.
Mhm.
And little did we know that was like our last hurrah of freedom.
Yes.
Because we got a call while we were walking down the beach, and my phone rang, and I knew it was the agency, and she said, "Would you like to be a mom?"
Wow.
And I said, "Yes." And she said, "It's going to happen this Friday." And this was on a Monday.
Mhm.
And I remember saying, "Okay, I thought we had 2 years." And she said, "Well, remember I said it was an average." Anyway, that Friday we picked up Ian. And what I find so interesting and beautiful was about the time that we met with the lady at the adoption agency was about the time my son was born.
Wow.
So he was 6
Interesting.
months old when we adopted him.
Hmm.
And it was so many small miracles into this one big miracle, and just allowing myself to just know that when God spoke to me that I needed to listen.
Mhm.
And when those situations happened, like my husband just introducing himself to a coworker and knowing that that was the place that we were supposed to go, knowing those little things, being home on a Friday night, watching a PBS documentary, those things that just happened, and we allowed them to happen. And those were the small miracles that made the big miracle.
I love that sometimes we think, oh, it was just coincidence, or, everything fell into place, but no, really,
Yeah.
it was God's hand
Yeah.
orchestrating all of those little things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was miraculous. Not to beat the word down. It has changed our lives. I'm so grateful that God spoke to me that
Mhm.
Friday night that I was sitting at home and told me that this would be my journey, because I would have never imagined that I would be sitting in this, space in my life and so happy and learning about a child who was very different from me. And I have
Mhm.
2 boys now. We ended up adopting Ian's biological brother as well about 2
Wow.
years later. And that one we had 18 hours notice.
Wow.
Yeah, that one was a little bit unplanned. So, the whole family planning thing, God happens and you just
Mhm.
roll with it.
Mhm.
So we were called on a Tuesday and they said, "Can you come pick him up the next morning?" And it was wonderful. And so, they always say, watch out what you pray for, because you just might get it.
Right.
And it's not going to be on your timeline.
I know. We make our little plans and we have our little ideas, and he's like, well,
Woman makes plans and God laughs.
mhm, yeah, I have other
Yeah.
plans for you.
Yes, yes, yes. And those other plans are always so much better.
I know.
They're always so much better.
His are so much better.
Yes, yes, yes. We just have to be open to receiving them. And I really believe that that's what miracles are about, is
Mhm.
just being open to receive them and know that God's going to give them to you at his time and
Mhm.
in his way.
Mhm.
And we just have to be patient.
I've talked to a lot of people who've gone through the adoption process, and
Mhm.
it's such an emotional experience.
Mm.
What were some of the emotions you were feeling during that time?
There was an emotional roller coaster ride. It was very heart wrenching to work with their birth mom,
Mhm.
see her story. I remember when Ian came to us and she brought. That's another one. She brought Ian in this stroller that she had obviously gotten somewhere. She may have
Mm.
even found it like out, left on the street somewhere. And
Mhm.
it was filthy, and his clothes were filthy. And I remember telling Michael, I can't even take Ian home in these clothes. They're just
Mhm.
so filthy. Those kind of things where you think people live like this. I mean, this is the norm for many people in this country and throughout the world. And these things that we take for granted, that I can just, let's just run to Target and go and get some new
Mhm.
clothes. Like, they don't have that. And
Mhm.
it has really opened my heart more and more to people who don't have as much. And God has really, really, really touched my heart with that and given me much more compassion than I had, I think, before this whole process. So it's just, in many ways, God has taught me through the miracles. My compassion has grown exponentially because of this.
I love that.
I think anyone who ever thinks about adoption should go into it with an open heart and an open mind, and know that if you truly are being called to do this, and not everyone is called to do it, but for us, it was definitely something that I knew we would do. I would just give the advice to people to be open to those little miracles. God is going to work out the details. And I love that. I always grew up with the devil is in the details, and I scratch that. God is in the details.
Yes.
God is in those small little pieces where you introduce yourself to a coworker, and that is where God can be found. And I just love those kind of things. And so I tell people, just be open. You'll be led. You'll know when the time is right, because God will speak, and it will be loud and clear.
I love that advice, and I completely agree. I've seen instances in my life where I've been guided, and just those little things that you think, wow, I was in the right place at the right time. And being open is critical to receiving God's miracles. So I love that advice.
Yeah.
So I'd like to welcome Diane from Nevada to the show. She's going to share a miracle experience with us that happened 64 years ago when she was a young girl. I'm really excited to hear this story. So thanks for being on the show, and let's hear your experience.
Okay, well, as I said, I was 11 years old. I was babysitting for a family of 3 children, a 7-year-old boy, a 4-year-old girl, and a 14-month-old girl. The father was working on the Palisades Dam Reservoir in Idaho, and the mom was huckleberry picking. This all happened in Star Valley, Wyoming. It's a rural area, so you got to keep that in mind. The family had a home, and out in front of the home was a big row of trees next to the dirt gravel road. And then they had a little irrigation ditch that ran down inside their yard by the trees. And if that water was running, it was quite a bit of water. The father had put a rope up in a branch of the tree for the boy, 7-year-old, to swing on. But if the water was running, they wouldn't let him do it because he would drag his shoes in the water and get them wet. But anyway, so the mom says, if the water is running, do not let him swing on that rope and play in the water. So he wanted to do that. I had the children out in the front yard playing with them. And this boy wanted to go swing on that rope, and I told him no, he couldn't. That his mom said not to let him do that if the water was going. And he got really mad at me, and he says, I'm going to kill you.
Wow.
And so he ran around to the side of the house, to the back, and I didn't know what he was going to do. 11 years old, I had no idea. And so I got the 2 little girls and took them in the house and locked the door, left them in the dining room area, and walked through the kitchen and down about 5 steps. And I was going down those steps to lock the back door. He came up from the basement with a gun.
Wow.
And that scared me. And he ran out before I could, do anything. So he ran out, and I went ahead and locked just the screen door, and then went back up the steps. And as I got to the landing, he shot through the door at me.
Wow.
So, and it was a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun, and only one barrel went off. And I was at the landing, and he shot at me, and so I was up that 5 steps, and so it went kind of up, sloped up, and it hit me in the right shoulder, in the back, and came out the front, and it shot all my ball and socket away.
Wow.
And it didn't hurt. There was no pain at all, maybe because I was in shock. So I walked into the kitchen, and I remember kneeling down and thinking, this is a dream. And then I got up, and maybe my subconscious was worried about the little girls. I don't know. But I walked in the dining room where they were, and I kind of went down on one knee again, and I heard somebody pounding on the front door. It was a lady, and she says, come unlock the door. So I got up and unlocked the door, and it was a neighbor across the street. She grabbed a hold of me and helped me down the front steps of the house and out to the road. I was too heavy for her to lift, but she started walking me down the road and then hollered at another lady down a little ways to come out and help her. It was only maybe a block or block and a half to the main road. And they got me down there, and the first car that came by, they hailed that car down and they put me in that car, and he took me to the hospital. The hospital was about 25 miles away. And I remember on the way to the hospital asking him, now I can come right back home, right?
And you still didn't have any pain? Were you
I
bleeding?
still did not have any. Oh, I was bleeding really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when they put me in the car, my arm just kind of turned and I grabbed it because it felt like it was going to fall off.
Yeah.
Because it was just hanging by muscles and tissue. So they took me to the hospital, and somebody had called ahead, and the doctor and nurses were there waiting for me. Somebody had gone and got my mom and told her that I was nipped by a bullet. So they took her to the hospital, and when she saw me in the hospital, I think she passed out.
Oh.
I remember laying on in the operating room. This was just a rural hospital. Everybody could see what everybody was doing there. I looked across the hall, and she was sitting there in the chair with her feet propped up. Then after that, I don't remember anything until I woke up from the surgery. I was very fortunate because the doctor that operated on me had been a surgeon in the Korean War. So he knew all about gunshot wounds. And if he hadn't been there, they would have had to send me to Salt Lake by car 4 hours away, and I probably would have bled to death.
Yeah.
But I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. The first 10 days, they didn't know if I would live or if they could save my arm. So I was pretty critical those first 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the 10 days, then when they knew I was going to live, they put me in an upper body cast. And my arm was out. And I had a brace from my arm down to the body cast to hold it up. And then they cut a hole in my stomach area so I could breathe good. And they cut a hole in the back of it so they could dress my wound.
Wow.
And I wore that cast for 4 months.
Oh my gosh.
It was such a pain. But my arm from my shoulder to my elbow is 4 inches shorter.
Oh, okay.
Because it shot out so much.
Wow.
So here I am, 64 years later, still alive. I've had a lot of things happen to me, and I tell my husband I'm too mean and stubborn to die.
You're tough, huh? Wow.
Yes.
What happened to the little boy, and how did the neighbor see? Did she hear the gunshot and run over? Why was she there?
Gunshot. I have so many people ask me what happened to that little boy, and I don't have an answer. I don't know. I was young. I don't know what happened.
What was going through your mind at the time? Did you have thoughts or worries that you might die?
I didn't. They kept me pretty well sedated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I do remember when I came out of surgery that night, when I kind of came out of the anesthetic, a lot of people in my room, my parents, my grandparents, the parents of that little boy were in there.
Hmm.
And I get really choked up when I tell this part. But I remember my dad sitting by the side of my bed on a stool with his face in his hands, crying. And I thought, oh, my dad really does love me.
Oh.
Because, back at that time, love was not spoken a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And there was not a lot of love shown. And I think it was just the era of the time. My parents went through the Depression. My dad was in World War II. My dad was the only one that had my blood type. So he was able to give me a transfusion with his blood.
Wow.
So basically, between him and the doctor and God,
Mm-hmm.
saved my lives. I know there's lots of prayers and fasting for me.
Mm-hmm. Did the community join in those fasts? And
Oh, yes.
prayers?
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Our church was very good at doing that.
Mm-hmm. Which that's such a powerful tool to help with miracles and healings is
Right.
a community
Right.
fast. Mhm.
In Star Valley where I grew up, they had a lot of camaraderie there. And usually things like this did not happen.
Mm-hmm. And another miracle that I would see in this is where you got shot.
Oh, yes. The doctor said if it had been over just a little bit, I would now not have been able to use my arm at all.
Mm-hmm.
And even just a little bit further, it would have killed me.
Mm-hmm.
It is a miracle. I was so very fortunate and lucky and blessed.
Mm-hmm. And
to-
watched over.
Right. Right.
Well, thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's our show for this week. Thank you, ladies, for your amazing stories, and I so appreciate you being willing to share those with us on this episode. If you're enjoying this podcast, make sure you subscribe, give it a review and a rating. This completely helps us spread the word that this is a podcast worth listening to. So thank you so much. I just wanted to give a shout out to a couple people that rated the podcast. Now, these are people that I don't know, so it wasn't solicited from me. But MacDaddy969 said, "In a world where we get so busy traipsing along our paths, thank you for the reminder that many unexpected and unexplained miracles happen around us every day. This will be a great conscious exercise for me to see more clearly and be more ready to be the person God needs me to be." Thanks for giving me that review. Another one says by Juan, a 5-star rating. "I love listening to heartfelt stories of personal miracles. These made me laugh and cry, and most importantly, hearing these stories made me reflect on the many miracles that fill my life every day. I came away feeling more grateful and more inspired to live a life of love." I see those reviews and it makes my heart sing that you are noticing the miracles in your life. I feel like that's my biggest desire, is to call awareness to that. So yay. Thank you for letting me know that this is helpful. If you're loving the podcast, go give it a 5-star rating and write a review. Also, I'd love to hear your miracle stories. Please consider sharing them on the podcast. I know these stories uplift others and call our attention to God, and that's powerful. So I can't wait to hear how God has shown up in your life. If you would like to submit to the show, or if you know someone else who's had a miracle story, let them know about this podcast. You can submit your story on wondersandmiracles.com. We remember the babies born sleeping, those we carried but never held, those we held but could not take home, those who came home but could not stay. Our prayers and our heart goes out to you this month in remembrance of those babies lost. And as always, remember to notice and celebrate the miracles everywhere, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen.